Yay, we're live. Hello, everyone. Everyone. Hello, Tila. That is to say, as far as I can tell, the only person here thus far. Welcome to another thrilling installment of the Isolated Literary Society presents Persuasion. Yes, well, hello, everyone. I hope that everyone's having a good day. I forgot to close the blinds a little bit here. The lighting is rather more dramatic.
Do you want those closed yet? Or are they?
Might as well.
Might as well.
There'll probably eventually be an issue. It's quite sunny today.
It is indeed.
There we go. Much better. Much better. Okay. Alrighty. So let's see. Where were we yesterday? What has happened? Oh, so many things have happened.
I think last time was mostly talking about the things that had happened.
Yeah. It was sort of catching up with Lady Russell.
Yes. Who is more of a bitch than I remember.
Yep. And Anne was, yes, Tila points out, Anne was coming into herself. She was starting to have some slight semblance of gumption, self-respect in her thoughts, and I think a little bit in her behavior, not directly speaking, but maybe a little bit in, you know. Anyway, let's see. What else happened? Oh, Captain Benwick may or may not be totes into Anne. He perhaps expressed... Charles is of the opinion that he wanted to come back to Upper Cross because he thought Anne would be there, and we found out Anne would not be there. He changed his mind.
Yes.
Captain Wentworth did another thing that was potentially nice.
Yes.
To Anne.
Yeah.
We're all aflutter about seeing Mr. Elliot in Bath. And I think that's about it.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yes, because we've just arrived. Anne and Lady Russell just arrived in Bath.
Yes, and apparently he's been calling on her father and sister.
Yes. Finally, now he appears to be, as they say, like as assiduous.
Heal the breach.
Yeah, as assiduous in his attentions as he was previously, insistent in refusing to offer them. I believe Lady Russell it much
referred
more.
To him as dismembering himself from the family tree.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, what was it? It was she said something quite good.
It was quite a colorful metaphor that she was drawing there. Well, don't.
If he really sought to reconcile himself like a dutiful branch, he must be forgiven for having dismembered himself from the paternal tree.
Indeed.
Yeah, dismembered is definitely feels like a more violent word than really is strictly necessary in that context. But yeah, so that's where we are. Anne has just been put down in Camden Place, and Lady Russell goes on to her own lodging. So she is not living in the same place as they are. But she's also in Bath.
She loves Bath.
She loves Bath. You love Bath so much, won't you marry it, Lady Russell? I love that whole passage that talks about like Lady Russell being like, oh, Christmas at the Musgrove, so much noise, I hate it. And then Jane Austen, as the narrator, says, and of course, it really wasn't the amount of noise she hated so much as it was the type of noise, because she loves the hustle and bustle of Bath, and all of that noise she finds quite welcoming. So she just hates families and children and joy.
Yes, mostly children.
All right. Let us begin at chapter 15. Sir Walter had taken a very good house in Camden Place, a lofty, dignified situation, such as becomes a man of consequence, and both he and Elizabeth were settled there, much to their satisfaction. Anne entered it with a sinking heart, anticipating an imprisonment of many months, and anxiously saying to herself, "Oh, when shall I leave you again?" A degree of unexpected cordiality, however, in the welcome she received did her good. Her father and sister were glad to see her for the sake of showing her the house and furniture, and met her with kindness. Her making a fourth when they sat down to dinner was noticed as an advantage. Wow.
That's in one of the adaptations, and I couldn't remember if if anyone actually said that.
Yeah, there are a lot of times in adaptations where they make a character say something that previously was only sort of observed by the narrator, but they were like, "That's too good. We can't not, can't not include that."
Yeah.
Yeah, Tila's like, wow, in all caps, question marks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, oh, they were so glad to see Anne because then they finally had someone to show the house and the furniture off to. And also, it's just nice having an even number at dinner. I don't know what the 4 thing really is about, just having an even number. But
I don't know why certain numbers for dinner is a big deal.
Yeah. Mrs. Clay was very pleasant and very smiling, but her courtesies and smiles were more a matter of course. Anne had always felt that she would pretend what was proper on her arrival, but the complacence of the others was unlooked for. They were evidently in excellent spirits, and she was soon to listen to the causes. They had no inclination to listen to her. After laying out for some compliments of being deeply regretted in their old neighborhood, which Anne could not pay, they had after laying out for some compliments.
Sounds like they were.
They were fishing for compliments. Yeah. I suppose everyone misses us back at Kellynch.
She's like
terribly, and she's like,
not so much, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of better since you left, actually.
They had only a few faint inquiries to make before the talk must be all their own. Oh, must it? Uppercross excited no interest. Kellynch very little. It was all Bath. Of course. Oh boy, I gotta say, just as I was reading the first line and going like, oh yeah, that's right, Sir Walter and Elizabeth, I forgot we have to like deal with these two again.
Yeah.
With the phrase, Anne entered it with a sinking heart. I'm like, yeah, that's how I feel about this chapter. Ooh, here we go. They had the pleasure of assuring her that Bath more than answered their expectations in every respect. Their house was undoubtedly the best in Camden Place. Their drawing rooms had many decided advantages over all the others which they had either seen or heard of. And the superiority was not less in the style of the fitting up or the taste of the furniture. Their acquaintance was exceedingly sought after. Everybody was wanting to visit them. They had drawn back from many introductions, and still were perpetually having cards left by people of whom they knew nothing. Ugh. Here were funds of enjoyment. Could Anne wonder that her father and sister were happy? She might not wonder, but she might sigh that her father should feel no degradation in his change, should see nothing to regret in the duties and dignity of the resident landholder, should find so much to be vain of in the littleness of a town. And she must sigh and smile and wonder too, as Elizabeth threw open the folding doors and walked with exultation from one drawing room to the other, boasting of their space, at the possibility of that woman who had been the mistress of Kellynch Hall, finding extent to be proud of between two walls, perhaps 30 feet asunder. I guess Anne's like, she's not surprised that they're happy with like just people paying attention to them.
Yeah.
But she's like, really? This is all it takes? It's just like you will just convince yourself that like I'm kind of surprised that she's expressing that sort of sentiment of like, really? You had Kellynch Hall and now you're like, oh my God, check out our house in Camden Place.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It is a little, well, not the first part about what the landowner should be.
Yeah. That like really
according to the class system of the time. Like,
you're happy just sitting around socializing in Bath and not having any of your like, duties seen to or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, that is a little surprising. I guess maybe also because they made such a big deal about how they couldn't like.
That's probably, it might be more
like,
that.
Like no economy, like they were at a loss as to like the economies that they could make at Kellynch.
Yeah.
That would allow them to stay there. But now that they're in a much smaller place, they're like,
just
we have the best house in the area, so we're cool.
Yeah. As long as we have the best of what's, available immediately.
Yeah.
But this was not all which they had to make them happy. They had Mr. Elliot, too. Anne had a great deal to hear of Mr. Elliot. He was not only pardoned, They were delighted with him. He had been in Bath about a fortnight. He had passed through Bath in November on his way to London, when the intelligence of Sir Walter's being settled there had of course reached him, though only 24 hours in the place, but he had not been able to avail himself of it. But he had now been a fortnight in Bath, and his first object on arriving had been to leave his card in Camden Place, following it up by such assiduous endeavors to meet, and when they did meet, by such great openness of conduct, such readiness to apologize for the past, such solicitude to be received as a relation again, that their former good understanding was completely reestablished. They had not a fault to find in him. He had explained away all the appearance of neglect on his own side. I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
It had originated in misapprehension entirely. He had never had an idea of throwing himself off. He had feared that he was thrown off, but knew not why, and delicacy had kept him silent. Upon the hint of having spoken disrespectfully or carelessly of the family and the family honors, he was quite indignant. He, who had ever boasted of being an Elliot, and whose feelings as to connection were only too strict to suit the unfeudal tone of the present day. He was astonished indeed, but his character and general conduct must refute it. He could refer Sir Walter to all who knew him, and certainly the pains he had been taking on this, the first opportunity of reconciliation, to be restored to the footing of a relation and heir presumptive, was a strong proof of his opinions on the subject. The circumstances of his marriage, too, were found to admit of much extenuation. This was an article not to be entered on by himself, but a very intimate friend of his, a Colonel Wallace, a highly respectable man, perfectly the gentleman, and not an ill-looking man, Sir Walter added, who was living in very good style in Marlborough Buildings. Marlborough. I don't know why that word is so hard to say all of a sudden. Marlborough. Guess I'm not used to seeing the words spelled out. I'm used to people just saying like,
yeah,
Marlborough.
Yeah.
Marlborough Buildings, and had, at his own particular request, been admitted to their acquaintance through Mr. Elliot, had mentioned one or two things relative to the marriage, which made a material difference in the discredit of it. Colonel Wallace had known Mr. Elliot long, had been well acquainted also with his wife, had perfectly understood the whole story. She was certainly not a woman of family, but well educated, accomplished, rich, and excessively in love with his friend. There had been the charm. She had sought him. Without that attraction, not all her money would have tempted Elliot, and Sir Walter was, moreover, assured of her having been a very fine woman. Here was a great deal to soften the business. A very fine woman with a large fortune, in love with him. Sir Walter seemed to admit it as complete apology. And though Elizabeth could not see the circumstance in quite so favorable a light, she allowed it to be a great extenuation.
Plus the woman's dead now, so
yeah,
she has a chance again.
Yeah. Like, well, I guess I'll let it slide. I want to speak ill of the dead.
Yeah.
Mr. Elliot had called repeatedly, had dined with them once, evidently delighted by the distinction of being asked, for they gave no dinners in general, delighted in short by every proof of cousinly notice, and placed his whole happiness in being on intimate terms in Camden Place. Anne listened, but without quite understanding it. Allowances, large allowances, she knew, must be made for the ideas of all who spoke. She heard it all under embellishment. All that sounded extravagant or irrational in the progress of the reconciliation might have no origin but in the language of the relators. Still, however, she had the sensation of there being something more that immediately appeared in Mr. Elliot's wishing, after an interval of so many years, to be well received by them.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, all of Mr. Elliot's behavior in the past, could have been, all we know about Mr. Elliot's behavior in the past comes from Lady Russell and Sir Walter and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And not a one of them is what you'd call like a particularly reliable narrator.
Right.
So like I was prepared for the possibility that Mr. Elliot was a perfectly sensible fellow.
Yeah.
But this just seems like too calculated.
The timing is a little, and the perfect excuses and everything.
Yeah.
Almost makes you wonder if like his wife is buried in the backyard.
Ooh.
That's just the way my mind goes.
Especially I mean, if she was rich enough, probably not, right? Like he just, he was happy being married to a beautiful rich woman,
Right, yeah.
And then when she, died, probably an illness or something, he was like, shit, I need to find another rich person to make it up to.
Yeah.
The line about he who had ever boasted of being an Elliot and whose feelings as to connection were only too strict to suit the unfeudal tone of the present day. Like, oh, if anything, I'm too feudal.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Calm down.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, where do we go? To be well received by them. In a worldly view, he had nothing to gain by being on terms with Sir Walter, nothing to risk by a state of variance. In all probability, he was already the richer of the two, and the Kellynch estate would as surely be his hereafter as the title. Okay, that is a good point.
Yeah.
A sensible man, and he looked like a very sensible man. Why should it be an object to him? She could only offer one solution. It was, perhaps, for Elizabeth's sake. There might really have been a liking formerly, though convenience and accident had drawn him a different way, and now that he could afford to please himself, he might mean to pay his addresses to her. Elizabeth was certainly very handsome, with well-bred, elegant manners, and her character might never have been penetrated by Mr. Elliot, knowing her but in public, and when very young himself. Amazing. She's like, I guess you might want to marry my sister. I mean, she's a good-looking and well-bred woman, and he doesn't know her very well.
I mean,
I suppose to people who don't know my sister very well, she probably seems like a catch.
Yeah.
How her temper and understanding might bear the investigation of his present keener time of life was another concern, and rather a fearful one. Most earnestly did she wish that he might not be too nice or too observant if Elizabeth were his object, and that Elizabeth was disposed to believe her so, and that her friend Mrs. Clay was encouraging the idea, seemed apparent by a glance or two between them, while Mr. Elliot's frequent visits were talked of. Oh, hi, Michelle. I'm so sorry that you didn't get the notice on time. All that's happened so far is that Anne has arrived in Bath with her father and sister. They're as tedious as ever. And we're hearing a lot about how Mr. Elliot has charmed them completely. Yeah. He has made every excuse for the situations of the past. It was all a misunderstanding. His reason for marrying this other woman instead of Elizabeth was quite extenuating circumstances, yada yada, so on and so forth. Anne is a little suspicious of him, but she can't think of why he would, because he at this point probably has more money than them, and he'll get Kellynch Hall and the title. He'll get the land and the title when
he's going to inherit in any case.
Yeah, in any case. So she's like, I don't know what his deal is, but he seems a bit off.
Yeah.
Anne mentioned the glimpses she had had of him at Lyme, but without being much attended to. Oh, yes, perhaps it had been Mr. Elliot. They did not know. It might be him, perhaps. They could not listen to her description of him. They were describing him themselves. Sir Walter especially. He did justice to his very gentlemanlike appearance, his air of elegance and fashion, his good-shaped face, his sensible eye, but at the same time must lament his being very much underhung. What does that mean?
What?
What does that mean?
Okay, I have to get my phone.
Underhung.
I have to find out what that means.
I know. I know what it sounds like, but like in context, very much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's put in quotes as if that is the thing that Sir Walter said about him. Must lament his being very much underhung, a defect which time seems to have increased. Nor could he pretend to say that 10 years had not altered almost every feature for the worse. Mr. Elliot appeared to think that he, Sir Walter, was looking exactly as he had done when they had last parted.
Of course.
Of course he did.
Like-
But Sir Walter had not been able to return the compliment entirely, which had embarrassed him. He did not mean to complain, however. Mr. Elliot was better to look at than most men, and he had no objection to being seen with him anywhere.
I wonder how many mirrors he brought with him.
Right? Oh my God, Sir Walter. Too
Mirrors
much.
don't travel well. He probably had to buy new ones when they came to Bath.
Probably. I mean, obviously, he left quite a few mirrors at Kellage, right? He probably didn't bring any of, except like a small shaving mirror or something
his
like
traveling mirrors.
Yes.
Special
Oh,
mirrors.
only my small traveling mirrors. Just about 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
Mr. Elliot and his friends in Marlborough Buildings were talked of the whole evening. Colonel Wallace had been so impatient to be introduced to them, and Mr. Elliot so anxious that he should. And there was a Mrs. Wallace, at present only known to them by description, as she was in daily expectation of her confinement. In daily expectation of her confinement?
Pregnant.
Oh!
Sorry, who are we talking about?
Mrs. Wallace. Colonel Wallace.
Okay.
Colonel and Mrs. Wallace are Mr. Elliot's friends in Marlborough Buildings.
Yeah, the only reason I know that is from extensive having read the King James version so many times.
Oh, I mean, I kind of thought that's
what they called it.
I kind of thought that's what it was heading towards, with in daily expectation, and that's it, of her confinement. That's what threw me. I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's just the period after. Directly after giving birth. I have no idea how long it lasted at that point, but it's too sensitive to talk about. People would know that you had sex. Oh my God.
Yeah, children just appear.
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Elliot spoke of her as a most charming woman, quite worthy of being known in Camden Place. And as soon as she recovered, they were to be acquainted. Sir Walter thought much of Mrs. Wallace. She was said to be an excessively pretty woman. Beautiful. He longed to see her. He hoped she might make some amends for the many very plain faces he was continually passing in the streets. The worst of Bath was the number of its plain women. He did not mean to say that there were no pretty women, but the number of the plain was out of all proportion. Yeah, sounds like hard for you, Sir Walter.
Yeah. Who again is an old dude.
Yeah.
Like an old widower.
Yeah.
Underhung, apparently the actual definition in terms of anatomy is it means that the lower jaw projects beyond the upper jaw.
Oh.
Another term is undershot.
Oh, okay.
Which we just call having like an underbite or
yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, everything's cleared up now.
I figured it was something like that, but I'd never heard that before.
Yeah. He had frequently observed as he walked that one handsome face would be followed by 30 or 35 frights. And once he had stood in a shop in Bond Street. Oh, as he had stood in a shop in Bond Street, he had counted 87 women go by, one after another, without there being a tolerable face among them. Sounds like a real fun hobby, Sir Walter.
I know,
Standing there
right?
Counting women and judging them.
Seriously. They also don't care.
It had been a frosty morning, to be sure, a sharp frost, which hardly one woman in 1,000 could stand the test of. Also, it was a cold day, and you're standing there judging women? Jesus.
Also, how bad does he probably look?
Right?
I mean...
But still...
We know he doesn't look as good as he thinks he does. There's no way.
But still, there certainly were a dreadful multitude of ugly women in Bath, and as for the men, they were infinitely worse. Such scarecrows as the streets were full of. It was evident how little the women were used to the sight of anything tolerable by the effect which a man of decent appearance produced. He had never walked anywhere arm in arm with Colonel Wallace, who was a fine military figure, though sandy-haired, without observing that every woman's eye was upon him. Every woman's eye was sure to be upon...
What?
Sorry, every woman's eye was sure to be upon him, Colonel Wallace. But no, there's no comma.
Sounds like there might be a typo.
Yeah, or it's just one of those weird things. Modest Sir Walter.
You can always check the other one and see.
Modest Sir Walter. He was not allowed to escape, however. His daughter and Mrs. Clay united in hinting that Colonel Wallace's companion might have as good a figure as Colonel Wallace, and certainly was not sandy-haired. Apparently being sandy-haired is, like, pretty serious ill.
I don't know. It's England has this weird thing about, like, red hair.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't describe as sandy, but I think that's what it means.
Oh, I assumed it meant, like, sort of blonde, but not like a nice golden blonde, like a kind of a light brown, an indecisive color of the like I have when I do not dye it.
Dishwater blonde.
Yeah.
That is possible.
That's what I assumed they meant. How is Mary looking? Said Sir Walter. In the height of his good humor. The last time I saw her, she had a red nose, but I hope that may not happen every day.
Oh my God. This is definitely what you should inquire about your daughter.
Arm in arm with Colonel Wallace. You can tell what the illustrator thinks of him. Probably the women are looking at them because they're like, oh my God, could those guys be more full of themselves?
Seriously.
It's just puffed out chests.
Honestly, I didn't know that guys walked arm in arm at that point.
Yeah, no, I honestly thought when he said arm in arm, I thought, oh, maybe that means like shoulder. It's more like shoulder to shoulder than like literally arm in arm. But maybe not.
I have no idea.
But the illustrations are not are from later. But
yeah.
Oh no, that must have been quite accidental. In general, she had been in very good health and very good looks since Michaelmas. If I thought it would not tempt her to go out in sharp winds and grow coarse, I would send her a new hat and pelisse. Well, dying of fire. Anne was considering how she should venture to suggest that a gown or a cap would not be liable to any such misuse, when a knock at the door suspended everything. A knock at the door, and so late? It was 10 o'clock. Could it be Mr. Elliot? They knew he was to dine in Lansdowne Crescent. It was possible that he might stop in on his way home to ask them how they did. They could think of no one else. Mrs. Clay decidedly thought it was Mr. Elliot's knock. Mrs. Clay was right. With all the state which a butler and a footboy could give. Footboy? For some reason,
he's not even a footman.
A footman is a perfectly reasonable term, but footboy is hilarious.
Yeah.
Mr. Elliot was ushered into the room.
There, footboy.
Yes. It was the very same man, with no difference but of dress. Anne drew a little back, while the others received his compliments. But her sister his apologies. Now, and her sister his apologies for calling at so unusual at an hour. But he could not be so near without wishing to know that neither she nor her friend had taken cold the day before, etc., which was all as politely done and as politely taken as possible. But her part must follow then. Sir Walter talked of his youngest daughter. Mr. Elliot must give him leave to present him to his youngest daughter. There was no occasion for remembering Mary.
I was momentarily confused.
Wow. Yeah. I was like, I momentarily forgot because Mary's married.
Yeah.
I momentarily forgot that Mary is actually the youngest.
Yeah. and he has kind of met her.
There was no occasion for remembering Mary. And Anne, smiling and blushing, very becomingly showed to Mr. Elliot the pretty features which he had by no means forgotten, and instantly saw, with amusement at his little start of surprise, that he had not been at all aware of who she was. He looked completely astonished, but not more astonished than pleased. His eyes brightened, and with the most perfect alacrity he welcomed the relationship, alluded to the past, and entreated to be received as an acquaintance already. He was quite as good-looking as he had appeared at Lyme. His countenance improved by speaking, and his manners were so exactly what they ought to be, so polished, so easy, so particularly agreeable, that she could compare them in excellence to only one person's manners. They were not the same, but they were perhaps equally good. I wonder who that could be. I forgot that he was in mourning when they saw him in Lyme, so that makes sense. But it also, how long did you wear mourning dress?
I don't know.
Kind of a long time in some time periods,
I should look
right?
that up too, because it actually,
I think there are time periods where it's like a year.
It actually is important.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, oh, he was just in mourning. Did his wife just die and he's already making up to Elizabeth? And then I went, well, he might be just out of mourning dress.
Yeah.
And
this is definitely a thing that Austen
Tila says
expects
it's a year for a spouse.
Oh, okay. It's definitely a thing that Austen expected her readers to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Why she never explains it.
She makes a point of the only reason I remembered that he was in mourning, even though it was mentioned that his wife had passed away. I only remembered about him being in mourning dress because she says, like, he looked the same aside from being dressed differently. And I'm like, she's pointing out specifically he's no longer in mourning dress.
Yeah.
Tila said 6 months for a sibling, and he said, or the spouse of a spouse, which I assume you mean the spouse of a sibling or sibling of a spouse. The spouse of a spouse.
I mean,
yeah, a lot of, I mean, the complication of like the time of mourning dress for someone in your polycule, very complicated in Regency England.
Extremely.
Anyway. He sat down with them and improved their conversation very much. There could be no doubt of his being a sensible man. 10 minutes were enough to certify that. His tone, his expressions, his choice of subject, his knowing where to stop. Sorry, I just love that was mentioned. It was all the operation of a sensible, discerning mind. As soon as he could, he began to talk to her of Lyme, wanting to compare opinions respecting the place, but especially wanting to speak of the circumstances of their happening to be guests in the same inn at the same time, to give his own route, understanding something of hers, and regret that he should have lost such an opportunity of paying his respects to her. She gave him a short account of her party and business at Lyme. His regret increased as he listened. He had spent his whole solitary evening in the room adjoining theirs, had heard voices, mirth continually, thought they must be a most delightful set of people, longed to be with them, but certainly without the smallest suspicion of his possessing the shadow of a right to introduce himself. If he had but asked who the party were, the name of Musgrove would have told him enough. Well, it would serve to cure him of an absurd practice of never asking a question at an inn, which he had adopted when quite a young man, on the principle of its being very ungenteel to be curious.
I know how important being genteel is to him.
Oh, very. The notions of a young man of 1 or 2 and 20, said he, as to what is necessary in manners to make him quite the thing, are more absurd, I believe, than those of any other set of beings in the world. The folly of the means they often employ is only to be equaled by the folly of what they have in view. His enquiries, but he must not be addressing his reflections to Anne alone, he knew it, and he was soon diffused again among the others, and it was only at intervals that he could return to Lyme. I'm sure that even with him expressing an interest in talking about Lyme, Sir Walter and Elizabeth would be turning the conversation back to things they have more experience in.
Yes, of course.
And now I want to know if they had to explain about Mary when she said, oh, yes, I was in Lyme with a party of friends, including my younger sister.
Right.
Which we previously mentioned I was the youngest, but I do have a younger sister. Like, did they have to explain that, or did she just tactfully say my other sister?
Possibly.
And just not mention
possibly.
that part.
Not pointed out that her father was wrong.
Yeah. I mean, he might remember. He's met them before. He's family. He might know that she's not the youngest.
Yeah. Presumably it wasn't that long ago. I mean,
yeah.
It could have been a while, but still.
His inquiries, however, produced at length an account of the scene she had been engaged in there soon after his leaving the place. Having alluded to an accident, he must hear the whole. When he questioned, Sir Walter and Elizabeth began to question also, but the difference in their manner of doing it could not be unfelt. She could only compare Mr. Elliot to Lady Russell in the wish of really comprehending what had passed, and in the degree of concern for what she must have suffered in witnessing it. He stayed an hour with them. The elegant little clock on the mantelpiece had struck 11 with its silver sounds, which is put in quotes. I assume it's a reference to a poem or something.
Probably.
And the watchman was beginning to be heard at the distance telling the same tale, before Mr. Elliot or any of them seemed to feel that he had been there long. Anne could not have supposed it possible that her first evening in Camden Place could have passed so well.
This is still the first evening? Wow.
Yep. Wow. I have no idea. I mean, I'm not going to look at Carolyn when I say this because I don't want you to, like, give anything away with your expressions, but, like, I don't know what to expect from Mr. Elliot. I don't know if he's going to turn out to be a Wickham where he's just, all good appearance, but he's a scoundrel underneath. Or is he going to turn out to actually be sensible? I mean, could go either way, I feel like. His disinterest in being connected to them earlier in life actually seems to me to indicate
a mark of being sensible.
Yeah, sensible. Now that he is a little bit older, like, wanting to be more polite to his family, especially since they are in the same town, is, like, a little reasonable, but, like, showing up at 11 o'clock just because, or 10 o'clock at night, just because he happened to be in the neighborhood does seem a little bit,
sus.
What's the word I'm looking for? Gosh darn it. There's a word that means sort of like unctuous.
Oh.
Unctuous. That's the word I'm looking for.
There you go.
Like, it means like
oily.
Greasy or oily?
Yeah. Slimy.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 16. There was one point which Anne, on returning to her family, would have been more thankful to ascertain even than Mr. Elliot's being in love with Elizabeth, which was her father's not being in love with Mrs. Clay. And she was very far from easy about it when she had been at home a few hours. On going down to breakfast the next morning, she found there had just been a decent pretense on the lady's side of meaning to leave them. She could imagine Mrs. Clay to have said that now Miss Anne was come, she could not suppose herself at all wanted, for Elizabeth was replying in a sort of whisper, "There must not be any reason, indeed. I assure you I feel it none. She is nothing to me compared to you."
Oh my God.
Like, you had to say, no, of course we still want you around. We love you. You're great. You don't have to say, Anne sucks.
Yeah.
God, Elizabeth is the worst.
In like probably a stage whisper.
And she was in full time to hear her father say, "My dear madam, this must not be. As yet you have seen nothing of Bath. You have been here only to be useful. You must not run away from us now. You must stay to be acquainted with the Mrs. Wallace, the beautiful Mrs. Wallace." He makes quite a big to-do about how beautiful Mrs. Wallace supposedly is.
Yes.
"To your fine mind, I well know the sight of beauty is a real gratification, such as my own."
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, like, Till was saying Clay is awful, but, like, honestly, she's only as awful as Elizabeth would be bound to draw to her, I feel like.
Yeah, and yeah.
He spoke and looked so much in earnest that Anne was not surprised to see Mrs. Clay stealing a glance at Elizabeth and herself. Her countenance perhaps might express some watchfulness, but the praise of the fine mind did not appear to excite a thought in her sister. The lady could not but yield to such joint entreaties and promised to stay.
Really, what does excite thoughts in Elizabeth?
Yeah, not much. In the course of the same morning, Anne and her father, chancing to be alone together, he began to compliment her on her improved looks. He thought her less thin in her person, in her cheeks, her skin, her complexion greatly improved, clearer, fresher. Had she been using anything in particular? No, nothing. Merely Gowland, he supposed. I don't know what that is. Gowland?
Probably a face cream.
Right. No, nothing at all. Ha! He was surprised at that and added, "Certainly you can do no better than continue as you are. You cannot be better than well, and I should recommend Gowland, the constant use of Gowland during the spring months. Mrs. Clay has been using it at my recommendation, and you see what it has done for her. You see how it has carried away her freckles." Yeah, nothing worse than freckles. Yeah, it must be some kind of face cream. If Elizabeth could have heard this, such personal praise might have struck her, especially as it did not appear to Anne that the freckles were at all lessened. But everything must take its chance. The evils of the marriage would be much diminished if Elizabeth were also to marry. As for herself, She might always command a home with Lady Russell. She's like,
poor Solace indeed.
Yeah, but it's like, I love that she's like, oh my God, what if my dad's gonna try and marry Mrs. Clay? Well, as long as Elizabeth also marries very soon, it won't be such a big deal, and I can always go live with Lady Russell. Like, I will not stay in that house.
Yeah.
It doesn't even say that that's a possibility.
Yeah,
this is true. Odd, though. The way that this illustration, he began to compliment her on her improved looks, that does not look like Sir Walter.
No, it doesn't.
At all.
Like, I wonder if the illustrator just drew a man.
Well, I honestly wonder if the illustrator misunderstood and thought that was supposed to be Mr. Elliot.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that actually, we can't see his face directly, but that's not at all the shape that we just saw in the previous illustration.
Right.
Of Sir Walter. So weird.
That's true.
Michelle confirms it was a popular skin lotion of the time.
Probably marketed to get rid of freckles.
Right. Lady Russell's composed mind and polite manners were put to some trial on this point in her intercourse in Camden Place. The sight of Mrs. Clay in such favor, and of Anne so overlooked, was a perpetual provocation to her there, and vexed her as much when she was away as a person in Bath who drinks the water, gets all the new publications, and has a very large acquaintance has time to be vexed. Drinks the water?
Yeah, you would go to Bath to drink the waters. Like you would, they also had actual baths, but you would, there were like.
Oh, do you like drink mineral water?
Yeah.
I've heard people taking the waters, but I always assumed that meant bathing in them, not drinking them.
I have heard that it meant both. And in Bath, it's all about the water. So like, that's what people.
I knew that, but I didn't know about them drinking mineral water.
The pump room is, that's what people drank at the pump room.
I don't know about the pump room.
Oh, okay. I thought it had been mentioned in other. I'm sure they mentioned it at some point.
Yeah. So it's not just something you don't just like buy it at a store and then drink it at home. It's like you go somewhere.
Yeah.
To do, it's a social occasion.
Yes.
Explaining why Lady Russell does not have so much time to be vexed.
Yeah.
She goes out drinking just water.
Yes.
Gets all the new publications and has a very large acquaintance. So she's a busy lady.
Yes.
As Mr. Elliot became known to her, she grew more charitable or more indifferent toward the others. His manners were an immediate recommendation, and on conversing with him, she found the solid so fully supporting the superficial that she was at first, as she told Anne, almost ready to exclaim, "Can this be Mr. Elliot?" and could not seriously picture to herself a more agreeable or estimable man. Everything united in him: good understanding, correct opinions,
yes,
knowledge of the world, and a warm heart. He had strong feelings of family attachment and family honor, without pride or weakness. He lived with the liberality of a man of fortune, without display. He judged for himself in everything essential, without defying public opinion in any point of worldly decorum. He was steady, observant, moderate, candid, never run away with by spirits or by selfishness, which fancied itself strong feeling, and yet with a sensibility to what was amiable and lovely, and of value for all the felicities of domestic life, which characters of fancied enthusiasm and violent agitation seldom really possess. She was sure he had not been happy in his marriage. Colonel Wallace said it, and Lady Russell saw it, but it had been no unhappiness to sour his mind, nor, she began pretty soon to suspect, to prevent his thinking of a second choice. Her dissatisfaction in Mr. Elliot outweighed all the plague of Mrs. Clay. Yeah, Tila points out the fact that Elizabeth likes him is not high recommendation.
Yeah.
It was now some years since Anne had begun to learn that she and her excellent friend could sometimes think differently. And did not, that's a very subtle way of putting it.
Yes.
And it did not surprise her, therefore, that Lady Russell should see nothing suspicious or inconsistent, nothing to require more motives than appeared in Mr. Elliot's great desire of a reconciliation. In Lady Russell's view, it was perfectly natural that Mr. Elliot, at a mature time of life, should feel it a most desirable object, and what would very generally recommend him, amongst all sensible people, to be on good terms with the head of his family, the simplest process in the world of time upon a head naturally clear, and only erring in the heyday of youth. Anne presumed, however, still to smile about it, and at last to mention Elizabeth. Lady Russell listened and looked and made only this cautious reply. Elizabeth. Very well. Time will explain. Huh. Not totally clear what they're talking about here.
I think Lady Russell might be thinking of him for Anne.
Oh.
I'm not sure. It's definitely not explicit, but that would explain.
Yeah, no, that would explain
why
that
she's so enthusiastic about him now.
Yeah. And then Anne finally mentions Elizabeth, and Lady Russell goes, "Oh well, I guess time will tell."
Yeah.
On that one, like that is weird.
Yeah, it is.
Wait, Tila, I'm not sure what she said. What? Wait, Carolyn, really? It's Carolyn with a K and no E on the end, just by the way. just so you know.
That's okay. I'm just guessing. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That must be what she. I'm just like, what is she referring to? What have we been saying? Sometimes I don't see the messages right away. So,
right,
but yeah, that must be it, because otherwise it doesn't make it that's the only thing that makes sense about that little exchange.
Either that, or
because up to that point, it sounded to me like Lady Russell was going, "Yes, of course he wants to marry Elizabeth."
Yeah,
and then it's like Anne only smiled and then mentioned Elizabeth. I'm like, weren't we already talking about Elizabeth?
Yeah, I can't think of any other reason why Lady Russell would be like, maybe he might be thinking about getting married again.
Yeah,
because otherwise I could possibly see how she could think that he is just trying to get back in the family, because to Lady Russell that's like the most important thing.
Of course he would. Yeah, I guess, but it does mention him having a second choice.
Yeah,
in marriage. So I thought Lady Russell was already in the mindset of like, oh yes, he must want to marry Elizabeth, because he previously was thought of as being for Elizabeth.
Right.
So it just seems like it would follow that, like, he would still be, at least considered by others, if not himself, as being for Elizabeth. Yeah. Anyway. Obviously, Lady Russell thinks better of Anne, which is one of her only good qualities.
Yes.
Possibly her only good quality, actually. she's the only one in their kind of family circle who thinks highly of Anne.
Yeah.
I mean, she's already like, it expresses that she's annoyed that Mrs. Clay is treated as a favorite over Anne.
Yeah.
But although that, I suppose, has less to do with her considering Anne of value than her considering Mrs. Clay as not being of value, because she's a commoner.
I don't know. I think with Lady Russell, it's probably equal parts.
Yeah.
Because she does value Anne.
It was a reference to the future which Anne, after a little observation, felt she must submit to. She could determine nothing at present. In that house, Elizabeth must be first, so that supports it as well. And she was in the habit of such general observance as Miss Elliot, that any particularity of attention seemed almost impossible. Mr. Elliot, too, it must be remembered, had not been a widower 7 months. So apparently, maybe 6 months was the length of time at the time period. As nobody seems for mourning dress.
Isn't that what Tila said, or did she say?
She said a year for a spouse.
Oh,
that's what I thought I remembered as well.
That makes but
maybe at the time period it was only 6 months. Maybe in other time periods it's been a year. I don't know. Nobody seems to think it. No one has commented on the fact that, like,
that he's not still wearing.
Yeah.
That's
Tila points out mourning might be less for men. They've got to move on, you know.
Men have needs.
Yes. A widower of 7 months. A little delay on his side might be very excusable. In fact, Anne could never see the crape round his hat without fearing that she was the inexcusable one in attributing to him such imaginations. So
apparently he is.
He is? She said something about him being in different dress, so I assumed it meant he was no longer in mourning, but...
Maybe he's not in full mourning?
Yeah, maybe
I don't know.
Like a half mourning, quarter mourning.
So much I don't... Okay.
Yeah, we're just supposed to understand this.
Yeah, there's so much I don't know about.
It also, crepe is spelled C-R-A-P-E, which is funny to me.
Yes.
For though his marriage had not been very happy, still it had existed so many years that she could not comprehend a very rapid recovery from the awful impression of its being dissolved. Okay. Tila says after a year, you would go into half mourning.
Wow.
Apparently, mourning wasn't as strict until Victoria, and it picked up after Victoria lost Albert, at which point the rules became really regimented because they were via the crown. That makes sense.
That does make sense.
Totally. Man, that Queen Victoria, she did so many things that, like, she was a trendsetter.
Yeah, definitely.
The whole wearing white thing, wasn't that her?
Yeah, that was definitely her. She was
she was a trendsetter.
She was extremely
thought very highly of her, I understand.
She was extremely devoted to her husband. That's
all right. Let's see. Yes. However it might end, he was without any question their pleasantest acquaintance in Bath. She saw nobody equal to him, and it was a great indulgence now and then to walk to him about Lyme, which he seemed to have as lively a wish to see again, and to see more of as herself. They went through the particulars of their first meeting a great many times. He gave her to understand that he had looked at her with some earnestness. She knew it well, and she remembered another person's look also. Another person is, that's right up there. Tila says that CRAPE is a correct spelling. It is a different fabric from crepe with an E.
Oh.
Really?
Interesting.
It's madness.
There are a lot of blogs about this.
Oh, I believe it.
Yes.
I believe it. Another person is like quite the euphemism.
Yes. Apparently, white, gray, and even lavender were acceptable colors for half mourning. So half mourning is a thing.
You could, but it was still, you were limited in what colors you could wear.
Yeah. Also, not everybody observed it.
Yeah. Teal says it was different for women because, yes, men had to move on, but women were expected to be in full mourning for a year, half for longer than that, and even during half, they couldn't go to weddings and fun stuff.
Wow.
So they had no way to actually meet men, which was their ticket to being safe.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
You're basically a nun.
They did not always think alike. His value for rank and connection she perceived to be greater than hers. It was not merely complacence, it must be a liking to the cause, which made him enter warmly into her father and sister's solicitudes on a subject which she thought unworthy to excite them. The Bath paper one morning announced the arrival of the Dowager Viscountess Dalrymple and her daughter, the Honourable Miss Carteret. And all the comfort of number blank Camden Place was swept away for many days, for the Dalrymples, in Anne's opinion most unfortunately, were cousins of the Elliots, and the agony was how to introduce themselves properly.
Yes, such agony.
much agonies. Anne had never seen her father and sister before in contact with nobility, and she must acknowledge herself disappointed. She had hoped better things from their high ideas of their own situation in life. So apparently a baronet is not nobility.
Apparently.
Is that because it says apparently a viscountess? I imagine it being a higher position than a baronet, but still, I'm surprised that apparently it doesn't count as, they don't count as nobility.
I have no.
Maybe she just meant with other nobility? Anyway.
I don't know. I don't.
She had hoped better things from their high ideas of their own situation in life, and was reduced to form a wish which she had never foreseen, a wish that they had more pride, for our cousins, Lady Dalrymple and Miss Carteret, our cousins, the Dalrymples, sounded in her ears all day long. Sir Walter had once been in company with the late Viscount. Is that the correct pronunciation in English?
Yeah.
Viscount?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've always heard.
Yeah. I would just second guessed myself.
Yeah, I mean.
I know in French it's more like Vicomte.
Oh, right, yeah.
But I wasn't, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard it. I know you don't pronounce the S, right, even in English.
Yeah, no, it's
the Viscount.
We got these on a
Viscount. It's like a discounted count. Dumb joke. I apologize.
What's funny is that's always how I've thought of it. I have no idea which rank is higher, but I've always thought of a Viscount as being lower.
You know, that seems like it should be. It's like a sub count or something.
Right, exactly.
Like,
it's a count on a discount.
Thank you, Teal. I'm glad you enjoyed the check. All right. Sir Walter had once been in company with the late Viscount, but he had never seen any of the rest of the family, and the difficulties of the case arose from there having been a suspension of all intercourse by letters of ceremony, ever since the death of that said late Viscount, which, in consequence of a dangerous illness of Sir Walter's at the same time, there had been an unlucky omission at Kellynch. No letter of condolence had been sent to Ireland. The neglect had been visited on the head of the sinner, for when poor Lady Elliot died herself, no letter of condolence was received at Kellynch, and consequently there was but too much reason to apprehend that the Dalrymples considered the relationship as closed. How to have this anxious business set to rights and be admitted as cousins again was the question, and it was a question which, in a more rational manner, neither Lady Russell nor Mr. Elliot thought unimportant. Family connections were always worth preserving, good company always worth seeking. Lady Dalrymple has taken a house for 3 months in Laura Place and would be living in style. She had been in Bath the year before, and Lady Russell had heard her spoken of as a charming woman. It was very desirable that the connection should be renewed, if it could be done, without any compromise of propriety on the side of the Elliots. Yeah, Tila points out not sending a letter of condolence would be a huge snub, which sounds like it would be. I concur. Sir Walter, however, would choose his own means, and at last wrote a very fine letter of ample explanation, regret, and entreaty to his right honourable cousin. Neither Lady Russell nor Mr. Elliot could admire the letter, but it did all that was wanted in bringing 3 lines of scrawl from the Dowager Viscountess. She was very much honoured and should be happy in their acquaintance. The toils of the business were over. The sweets began. They visited in Laura Place. They had the cards of Dowager Viscountess Dalrymple and the Honourable Miss Carteret to be arranged wherever they might be visible, and our cousins in Laura Place, our cousins, Lady Dalrymple and Miss Carteret, were talked of to everybody. Anne was ashamed. Had Lady Dalrymple and her daughter even been very agreeable, she would still have been ashamed of the agitation they created, but they were nothing. There was no superiority of manner, accomplishment, or understanding. Lady Dalrymple had acquired the name of a charming woman because she had a smile and a civil answer for everybody. Miss Carteret, with still less to say, was so plain and so awkward that she would never have been tolerated in Camden Place but for her birth. Lady Russell confessed that she had expected something better, but yet it was an acquaintance worth having. And when Anne ventured to speak her opinion of them to Mr. Elliot, he agreed to their being nothing in themselves, but still maintained that, as a family connection, as good company, as those who would value good company around them, they had their value. Anne smiled and said, "My idea of good company, Mr. Elliot, is the company of clever, well-informed people who have a great deal of conversation. That is what I call good company." "You are mistaken," said he gently. "That is not good company. That is the best. Good company requires only birth, education, and manners, and with regard to education is not very nice. Birth and good manners are essential, but a little learning is by no means a dangerous thing in good company. On the contrary, it will do very well. My cousin Anne shakes her head. She is not satisfied. She is fastidious. My dear cousin," sitting down by her, "you have a better right to be fastidious than almost any other woman I know. But will it answer? Will it make you happy? Will it not be wiser to accept the societies of these good ladies in Laura Place, and enjoy all the advantages of the connection as far as possible? You may depend upon it that they will move in the first set in Bath this winter, and as rank is rank, your being known to be related to them will have its use in fixing your family, our family, let me say, in that degree of consideration which we must all wish for."
Must we?
Right, Tila said, "Well, none of you are making Anne happy. Just let her read." "Yes," sighed Anne, "we shall indeed be known to be related to them." Then, recollecting herself, and not wishing to be answered, she added, I certainly do think that there has been by far too much trouble taken to procure the acquaintance. I suppose, smiling, I have more pride than any of you, but I confess it does vex me that we should be so solicitous to have the relationship acknowledged, when we may be very sure it is a matter of perfect indifference to them. Pardon me, my dear cousin, you are unjust to your own claims. In London, perhaps, in your present quiet style of living, it might be as you say, but in Bath, Sir Walter Elliot and his family will always be worth knowing, always acceptable as acquaintance. Well, said Anne, I certainly am proud, too proud to enjoy a welcome which depends so entirely upon place. I love your indignation, said he. It is very natural. But here you are in Bath, and the object is to be established here with all the credit and dignity which ought to belong to Sir Walter Elliot. You talk of being proud. I am called proud, I know, and I shall not wish to believe myself otherwise, for our pride, if investigated, would have the same object, I have no doubt, though the kind may seem a little different. In one point, I am sure, my dear cousin, he continued, speaking lower, though there was no one else in the room. In one point, I am sure we feel alike. We must feel that every addition to your father's society, among his equals or superiors, may be of use in diverting his thoughts from those who are beneath him. He looked, as he spoke, to the seat which Mrs. Clay had been lately occupying, a sufficient explanation of what he particularly meant. And though Anne could not believe in their having the same sort of pride, she was pleased with him for not liking Mrs. Clay, and her conscience admitted that his wishing to promote her father's getting great acquaintance was more than excusable in the view of defeating her. I am so glad that I have been looking for a good ending place for like the last couple of paragraphs, and I kept thinking, maybe I should just cut it off because it was getting ever closer to an hour. But yeah, there we go. That was the end of the chapter. So perfect place to end. Anyway, so more characters. Good.
Yes.
How exciting. So yeah, that's God, I'm like, well, yeah, it's a bunch of stuff has happened, I guess. Mr. Elliot is at least interesting. But boy, would I love to go back to. I mean, even in Uppercross and in Lyme, even with Mary around, right? It's still more enjoyable than Anne being just suffocated by her father and Lady Russell and Elizabeth. So yeah. But we shall persevere.
Yes.
Oh, we're more than halfway through the book. At any rate, I'll wrap up quickly because we're over an hour now. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope everyone enjoyed it today. We will be taking the weekend off, and then we will be back on Monday at 6:30 again. That's all I have to say on that subject. Do you guys like my hair today? It's it dried very curly for some reason. I don't know. That's why I didn't put it in a ponytail. I was like, oh, my hair's kind of curly today. What a nice change. It isn't usually. Anywho, everybody have a great weekend, however your hair looks, and I will see you guys on Monday. Bye. Yeah.